The first light of dawn stretched gently across the banks of the Indus River, spilling pale gold over the slow-moving water. Mist hovered low above the surface, curling in delicate wisps, clinging to reeds and rising from the mud along the river's edge. The air was cool, soft against skin, carrying the faint scent of wet earth, river silt, and the promise of growth. Here, in this early hour, the river spoke to those who watched it closely. The way its surface shimmered in the morning, the gentle ripple against a jutting stone, the subtle currents that hinted at deeper pools and shifting channels. Barefoot early risers stepped carefully along the soft, dew-laden mud, feeling each subtle indentation, each pebble, each ridge of hardened clay beneath their toes. They paused at intervals, glancing down the river as if to gauge its temperament, the quiet murmur of the water providing a rhythm for thought. Fishermen dragged their nets into the shallows with methodical patience, pulling the glistening mesh through the water, the motion measured and unhurried. Each movement was deliberate, learned through years of observation, a dance with the river itself, knowing when to tug, when to wait, when to lift. Water splashed softly around ankles, the cool touch sending shivers up the spine, while the glint of small fish darting beneath the surface added an unpredictable shimmer to the practice of this ancient craft. On the levees and terraces stretching inland, farmers began their survey of the land. Their hands traced the ridges of mud walls, pressing gently against sun-baked surfaces, assessing moisture, firmness, and the readiness of the soil for planting. The smell of ripening crops mixed with the damp earth, a sensory signal as important as the sight of sprouting seeds or the feel of a well-packed levee. Slowly, the farmers bent to the task at hand, running fingers along furrows, testing the grain of clay, noting the subtle shifts where water might collect too deeply or run too quickly. Every step, every motion was an act of observation, a quiet communion with the land, as if each breath of air, each vibration of water, was speaking directly to the hands and mind that tended it. Children, still sleepy but drawn by the soft stirrings of activity, walked along the levees beside their parents or siblings. Their small feet sank slightly into wet soil, leaving tiny footprints that the river would later wash away, only to return with new impressions the next day. They watched and mimicked, learning the rhythms of labor before fully understanding the logic behind it, the patience needed to coax crops from the ground, the quiet skill of fishing, the subtle reading of clouds and river currents. In their play, they internalized the pulse of life along the Indus, the ebb and flow, the gentle patterns, the repetition of seasons that shaped every gesture of the day. Here, amid the first blush of morning, the village itself seemed to breathe. The low hum of conversation, the scrape of nets against wooden poles, the distant crow of birds, all blended with the whisper of wind through grasses. Smoke rose lazily from hearth fires where early risers had begun to prepare breakfast, carrying the aroma of roasted grains and the faint tang of river water. Every element, the smell of soil, the sight of water, the tactile experience of mud and clay, formed an intricate network of cues, teaching inhabitants the lessons of patience, attention, and careful attunement to the environment. Reflection in these moments was natural and unforced. One might pause to observe how the sun's light caught the curve of a fish's scale in the water, how the mist lifted in slender threads, how the mud felt beneath fingers as levees were inspected. These small acts, repeated daily, created a profound sense of intimacy with the land and river. Survival was not merely about labor. It was about understanding the subtle language of the world, cultivating observation, and learning the precise timing of planting, harvesting, and fishing. As the sun rose higher, birds began their songs with a measured, almost ritualized cadence. Cranes flapped their wings lazily over the river, and the soft splash of small fish breaking the surface echoed in quiet intervals. Women carried water from the river to prepare meals, their movements slow and deliberate, jars balanced with care, feet brushing dew-laden grasses along the paths. Each motion, each choice, was part of the wider rhythm of life along the Indus. A city, a village, a network of people and water and soil moving together with gentle precision. By mid-morning, the day fully unfolded. Farmers bent over fields, smoothing soil for planting. Fishermen began hauling heavier nets from deeper water. Children ran along levees and between homes, learning by watching and imitating. The tactile sense of mud, water, and river silt under fingers and toes reinforced the connection to place. Even the occasional stumble, a slip of a foot in soft mud, a jar of water tilting precariously, was a lesson in balance, attention, and the necessity of careful observation. It was here, in these small, seemingly ordinary interactions with water, earth, and the slow rhythms of daily labor, that the Indus Valley people cultivated the subtle skills that would sustain their civilization for centuries. Observation, patience, and attentive care were more valuable than haste. Every repeated motion strengthened understanding, every day's work built experience, and every interaction with river, soil, and neighbor reinforced the cohesion of community. As the morning matured into full daylight, the mist lifted entirely from the river, revealing the smooth curve of the waterway, the far banks lined with reeds and distant huts, the glint of clay rooftops catching the sun. A soft breeze carried the smells of river, mud, and freshly turned earth further into the village, mingling with the faint aroma of baked bread and roasted seeds. In this space, where life unfolded at the pace of natural rhythm rather than human urgency, the foundations of a resilient, observant, and patient civilization were quietly, invisibly, taking shape. In these quiet hours, one could feel the heartbeat of the Indus Valley itself, the pulse of river against levee, foot against mud, hand against clay, breath against morning air. Here was a civilization learning to read the world in its minutiae, to synchronize labor with nature, to cultivate harmony with the unpredictable flow of water and seasons. Every small act, the drawing of a net, the smoothing of mud, the planting of a seed, was part of a long, unbroken chain that connected human effort to natural rhythm, creating a foundation for all that was to follow. And so the morning on the Indus unfolded, slow, reflective, measured, each movement resonating with quiet purpose. By the time the sun had fully risen and the village thrummed with the beginnings of a day, there was already a sense of continuity, of life observed and nurtured, of patterns understood and repeated, that would carry the Indus Valley civilization forward for centuries to come. The river, ever patient, flowed onward, carrying with it both water and memory, linking past and future in a silent, enduring rhythm. The morning light, having settled over the riverbanks, now touched the clusters of early settlements along the Indus plains. Sun-baked mud-brick walls glowed softly in the gentle warmth, the pale ochre of the clay reflecting the rising sun in muted hues. Narrow lanes wove between dwellings, packed firmly with the residue of countless feet, softened slightly by dew or a recent rain. Children's laughter drifted across these lanes, echoing softly against walls and over small courtyards, their bare feet leaving fleeting impressions on the earth, impressions soon reclaimed by wind, dust, or the occasional morning sweep of water. In the quiet courtyards, elders bent over sun-dried bricks, hands moving in rhythm with the work of maintenance. Clay, mixed carefully with straw and water, held a slight coolness despite the sun's rise. Fingers traced the edges of each brick, testing its firmness, adjusting for cracks or weaknesses before placing it into a wall. The tactile feedback, the slight give of damp clay, the coarse texture of straw fibers, the weight of each brick, was a form of communication, a silent dialogue between human hands and the material that would become home, protection, and communal memory. The scent of drying mud, earthy and rich, clung to fingers and clothing, marking the rhythm of labor and the passing of hours. Women moved along the lanes carrying small bundles of clay or water, their movements deliberate and measured, maintaining balance as they transported fragile materials. The quiet squish of wet mud beneath sandals, the gentle scrape of brick against brick as walls were repaired, the soft murmur of conversation between workers, all blended into a slow, meditative chorus. Each gesture, each step, was observed and mirrored by children, who learned the rhythms of construction not through instruction alone, but by careful attention to repeated motion, by the imitation of experienced hands and steady eyes. Families gathered near their homes, tending small plots of herbs or grains immediately adjacent to their dwellings. The smell of moist soil mingled with the scent of sun-dried clay, creating a tapestry of aromas that defined the sensory landscape of early life. Parents watched their children play near these plots, teaching them to respect the boundaries of growing plants, to move gently across soft soil, to notice the way water pooled or flowed along each terrace. The repetition of such observation, repeated daily, cultivated not only skill but a quiet attentiveness, a deep understanding that the environment itself demanded respect, patience, and care. Beyond the dwellings, the subtle hum of the Indus River continued to provide rhythm to the day. Fishermen returning from early casts carried their catch in woven baskets, their nets dripping in tiny arcs that sparkled in the sunlight. The water, reflective and slow, seemed almost sentient in its patience, moving endlessly yet changing only imperceptibly from day to day. Children paused to watch the shifting surface, noting the gentle eddies and patterns that would later inform their understanding of fishing, boating, and seasonal change. Each observation, absorbed quietly over countless repetitions, formed the subtle foundation for a culture that thrived in attunement with its river. The dwellings themselves displayed a quiet ingenuity. Simple yet deliberate, their mud brick walls formed a lattice of stability. Roofs, sometimes flat and sometimes slightly sloped, bore the weight of clay tiles or packed mud, resisting both sun and rain through careful construction. Doorways were small, precise, and framed with clay-laden wood, their edges pressed and smoothed with the hands of those who understood the interplay of sun, wind, and rainfall. Every feature of these buildings, from the spacing of bricks to the alignment of walls, demonstrated the patient accumulation of knowledge, careful observation repeated across years and generations. Children's games, intertwined with the rhythm of labor, offered lessons in balance, coordination, and attention. They ran along levees, leapt over shallow water channels, and climbed small mounds of mud, all while watching elders' hands work with bricks and tools. The soundscape was gentle but intricate, the scrape of clay under fingernails, the soft thump of a mallet settling a brick into place, the murmur of voices reflecting instruction, observation, and reflection. These sounds, subtle and repetitive, were woven into daily life as naturally as breath or heartbeat, teaching children a careful attentiveness that would guide them through labor, trade, and community life. In the quiet of mid-morning, elders paused to observe their work, noting the alignment of walls, the placement of cornerstones, the subtle shifts of sun on the clay. Fingers traced surfaces, smoothing rough edges, pressing small corrections into the clay while eyes scanned the broader pattern of streets and dwellings. Reflection arose not as an imposed meditation, but as an organic consequence of close observation, an awareness of how each wall, each brick, each channel of water connected to every other part of life. The village was not simply a collection of homes. It was a living system, an ecosystem of human effort and environmental responsiveness, shaped through deliberate, patient repetition. As noon approached, the sun climbed high and shadows shrank into the narrow lanes. The smell of warm clay intensified, mingling with dust, the faint aroma of river water, and the occasional scent of freshly roasted grains carried from a distant hearth. Workers paused to sip water from clay vessels, feeling its coolness against their tongues, noticing the small beads of moisture clinging to sun-warmed skin. Conversations continued in soft, measured tones, each word careful, each gesture deliberate. Even the act of sharing water or exchanging a tool became a rehearsal of attentiveness, patience, and coordination. Through all of this, there was an underlying awareness that each action contributed to permanence. Each brick set, each channel repaired, Each clay wall molded by hands that had grown skilled over years was a statement of resilience. Civilization here was not marked by grand monuments alone, but by the slow accumulation of countless deliberate, repeated acts. The patience of the river, the attentiveness of builders, and the quiet rhythm of daily labor fused into a temporal pattern that would persist for centuries, shaping not only structures but thought, skill, and community. As the afternoon sun softened into late light, children's play slowed, elders inspected the final work of the day, and women carried the last of the clay or water to finishing tasks. Dust rose softly from compacted lanes, the scent of mud and straw lingering in warm currents of air. Every surface bore the evidence of hands, smoothened walls, compacted levees, carefully placed bricks, all standing as silent testimony to skill, patience, and attentive labor. Reflection deepened in these moments, for each observer understood the fragile permanence of creation, how every repeated act reinforced both home and society, how small gestures over time created the resilience that would allow these settlements to endure through centuries of flood, drought, and human endeavor. Evening approached and the settlement exhaled softly into a slower rhythm. Fires were lit in hearths, casting shadows across mud-brick walls. Smoke curled lazily toward the deepening sky. Children, weary from play and observation, nestled near parents, listening as small stories were told in soft tones. The river beyond continued its unhurried passage, reflecting the fading light in gentle ripples, reminding all who watched that life, like the water, flows steadily and continuously, carrying memory and possibility alike. In this quiet interlude between day and night, the Indus Valley's people paused to observe their creation. Walls stood firm, channels awaited care, streets were ready for tomorrow's footsteps, and homes cradled families in the warmth of routine. Here, in these subtle, repeated interactions between hands, eyes, and environment, civilization was quietly, patiently being built. Not through singular brilliance, but through observation, attention, and repetition, a slow accumulation of understanding, skill, and care that would endure far beyond any single day. And so, as stars began to glimmer faintly against the deepening sky, and the river carried the last warmth of daylight downstream, the mud-brick walls held the imprint of countless hands, the lanes echoed with quiet history, and the settlement rested in harmony with its environment, poised to continue its life in rhythm with the river and seasons. Each brick, each gesture, each observation was a small, deliberate act in the long, patient story of the Indus Valley civilization. The morning mist had not yet fully lifted when the first figures appeared along the banks of the Indus, moving with a deliberate rhythm that mirrored the flow of the river itself. Canals carved with patient care traced the contours of the land, diverting the river's generous waters to fields and homes alike. Muddy channels gleamed faintly in the dawn light, reflecting the soft pinks and golds of early sun. Every bend of water, every sluice and levee, was a quiet testament to observation repeated over countless seasons, a deep knowledge of the river's temper and temperament embedded in the careful hands of those who maintained it. Women and men bent low over the edges of canals, their fingers brushing the water's surface as they checked for silt buildup, gently moving debris with small branches or bundled reeds. The faint scent of wet clay and fresh plants mingled with the sharp tang of the river itself, a sensory reminder of the intimate connection between land, water, and human labor. The rhythm of work was slow, deliberate. Footsteps pressed into the soft, damp earth, creating temporary impressions that would soon fade, yet the careful alignment of the canal walls remained, an enduring mark of patient effort. Children wandered nearby, carrying small clay pots or sticks, learning through observation and imitation. They noted the way water pooled behind levees, how gentle currents could be guided with minimal force, how silt collected in quiet eddies, and how overflow could be tamed if approached with careful measurement. Their small hands occasionally slipped into the shallow water, sending ripples along its surface that danced across reflections of the morning sky. Every ripple, every shimmer of light was both play and instruction, a subtle lesson in patience, measurement, and the art of working with nature rather than against it. The tactile feel of mud was constant. Fingers sank slightly into the soft clay lining each canal, hands pressed and smoothed to maintain stability, and the faint resistance of wet earth offered feedback that was both practical and meditative. Men adjusted wooden stakes to reinforce levees, noting the precise angle needed to slow the water without obstructing flow. Each movement was informed by repeated observation, by seasons of floods and droughts, by a quiet attentiveness to the river's moods. Even the soundscape contributed to instruction. The gentle lap of water against banks, the soft squelch of footsteps on mud, the distant clatter of household work, all layered into a continuous rhythm that guided hands and eyes alike. Fishermen moved through the canals in small dugout boats, testing water levels with long poles, ensuring that fish traps and irrigation channels did not interfere with one another. Nets brushed the water with a soft whisper, occasionally catching small fish that were immediately released or carried back to homes. The combination of utility and observation formed a quiet meditation, each action measured, each result noted, each season informing the next. Reflection arose naturally. Survival depended on harmony, on learning the subtleties of water flow, on repeated attentiveness, and on the patience to adjust slowly over time. Beyond the immediate banks, the wider fields absorbed the river's generosity. Farmers guided water into terraces, moving small gates of clay or wood to control flow, observing how each patch of soil received nourishment. Seeds already planted drank deeply, and small sprouts emerged in the moist earth, their tender green tips quivering in the morning breeze. The smell of wet soil, fresh vegetation, and faint river sediment mingled, evoking a layered sense of life sustained by careful attention. Reflection lingered on the interdependence of labor, observation, and adaptation. The river gave, but only to those who had learned its language through persistent, repeated acts of care. The canals themselves were also sites of quiet learning. Elders sat nearby, observing patterns of water movement, noting which sections accumulated silt first, and which bends eroded faster. Their eyes followed the shifting currents, tracing subtle differences in speed and depth. Fingers occasionally swept lightly through the flow, sensing eddies, reading the river as one might read lines in a book. Children watched, absorbing not just technique but philosophy. That knowledge is not rushed, that observation over time reveals truth, and that small, repeated efforts create lasting stability. The soundscape was richly textured. Water lapped softly against the earthen banks, the gentle murmur punctuated by occasional birdsong from nearby trees. Occasionally, the clatter of a pot or a wooden tool resonated from the settlement beyond. The air was moist and cool near the canals, carrying scents of river mud, herbs, and the faint sweetness of early crops. All elements, sound, smell, touch, sight, wove together to form a calming, reflective environment in which labor and learning were inseparable, in which patience was both taught and required. Even the midday sun played a role in the rhythm of work. As its heat touched the land, water in the canals glimmered with fleeting reflections, and the temperature of the mud shifted subtly underfoot, providing feedback to those who walked along levees or adjusted gates. Tools grew warm, hands adapted, and the quiet flow of labor continued. Every gesture was observed for precision and effect. A stake shifted slightly, a levee smoothed, a channel cleared. These acts were repeated daily, month by month, season by season, ensuring that the Indus Valley civilization could sustain its crops, its communities, and ultimately its culture. Women paused periodically to rest or to refill clay pots from nearby wells, their movements rhythmic and measured, blending seamlessly with the ongoing flow of men at the gates and children along the banks. Conversation was low, deliberate, and occasionally punctuated by laughter or instruction. Each word, each movement, reinforced attentiveness and cooperation. Reflection arose naturally. The survival of settlements depended not on isolated effort, but on the repeated coordination of many hands, the quiet observation of nature's signals, and the patient application of learned skill. As afternoon edged toward evening, shadows lengthened across the canals. Water flowed steadily, carrying reflections of mud-brick walls and the faint glimmer of distant reeds. Small currents shifted in subtle patterns, and occasional ripples spread gently across the surface, reminding all who watched that the river was alive, responsive, and continuous. Elders spoke softly to children about the river's moods, about past floods and how gates had been adjusted to protect fields. These stories were not merely entertainment but instruction. Repeated observation and reflection ensured that knowledge endured across generations. By the close of day, the canals were carefully inspected once more. Small repairs were made, gates checked, and the movement of water monitored. The smell of drying mud mingled with the faint tang of river sediment. Children, now tired from play and observation, helped carry simple tools back to homes or gathered small reeds for weaving mats. The river's voice, constant yet ever-changing, continued to provide instruction and reflection, a quiet, enduring teacher. In these moments of fading light, the settlement and its river existed in mutual harmony. Labor, observation, and patience had guided the day. Repeated acts of care had ensured the survival of fields, homes, and community. Reflection lingered. Life along the Indus required attunement, respect, and deliberate attention to patterns. Civilization itself was crafted here not through sudden brilliance, but through the slow, continuous application of care, observation, and repeated effort. Night approached gently. Shadows lengthened along the levees and water channels, the faint shimmer of moonlight reflecting in still pools. The air cooled, carrying the scent of damp earth and the soft whisper of flowing water. Settlers gathered near their homes, noting the day's work and the steady progress of their irrigation networks. Hands, eyes, and minds, trained through repetition and reflection, rested in the quiet satisfaction of labor completed. The river, slow and constant, continued its passage, teaching patience, resilience, and the subtle power of ordinary, repeated acts, a silent witness to the rhythms of life that would sustain the Indus Valley civilization for centuries. Slow rhythm of daily work, woven into the natural and social environment, ensured that life endured, knowledge persisted, and the foundations of culture were quietly, persistently strengthened. By nightfall, the settlement rested under the faint glow of moonlight. Hearths flickered, shadows danced along mud-brick walls, and the soft rustle of leaves in courtyards accompanied gentle murmurs of family conversation. Children lay near parents, absorbing lessons without conscious effort, while adults reflected on the day's work and its place in the larger rhythm of settlement life. The river beyond flowed steadily, a constant companion and teacher. And in the quiet of these ordinary acts, grinding, weaving, tending, observing, civilization found its pulse, patient and enduring, waiting to continue with the dawn. The morning sun climbed higher over the Indus plains, casting long, soft shadows across dusty lanes and packed earth thoroughfares. From distant settlements, villagers and merchants converged slowly toward the heart of the city, drawn by the rhythm of trade, the familiar scent of river mist mingling with roasted grains and sun-warmed clay. Each step on the uneven pathways sent a small, tactile tremor through sandals and bare feet alike, connecting feet, dust, and earth in a quiet, grounded rhythm. The air was alive with the subtle hum of human endeavor, the distant clatter of wooden carts, the muted scrape of pottery on packed mud, and the soft murmur of conversations blending into a continuous, meditative soundscape. Market stalls appeared gradually, a patchwork of woven mats, clay pots, and bundles of cloth. Women displayed jars of lentils and grains, their hands brushing over the surfaces to ensure cleanliness, while men carefully arranged beads, copper implements, and small metal ornaments, nodding the glint of sunlight as it caught on each polished surface. The faint scent of incense from a nearby shrine interwove with the earthy aroma of dried seeds, creating an atmosphere both sacred and commercial. Reflection lingered on the subtle artistry of presentation. How the placement of objects, the gentle tilt of a vessel, or the careful alignment of grains invited attention, encouraged inspection, and fostered trust between vendor and visitor. Children ran lightly between stalls, their feet stirring up tiny whirlwinds of dust. They carried small goods for their parents or simply followed the quiet music of daily life, noticing the textures of textiles under fingertips, the weight of clay pots in hands, and the gentle murmur of bartering voices. Each observation became an education, a slow accumulation of knowledge about negotiation, value, and the rhythms of commerce. Even the occasional stumble into a woven mat or overturned jar became part of the learning process, a tactile reminder of attentiveness and care. Footpaths winding between stalls and storage areas were trodden smooth by countless travelers. Caravan wheels left shallow grooves, while footprints in soft mud revealed the passage of herders, merchants, and children alike. From the river, boats drifted lazily toward the quays, their hulls creaking gently as ropes scraped against wooden posts. Fishermen disembarked with nets dripping cold water, while merchants carried small bundles of goods from ship to stall, each movement deliberate and measured. The ambient rhythm of arrival and departure formed a continuous, quiet pulse that governed the flow of the market, and in turn, the life of the city. Voices rose in measured tones. Negotiation was patient, deliberate. A merchant offered a string of beads, tracing a pattern with fingers, while a buyer tilted the vessel of lentils, feeling its weight and gently shaking it to listen for the subtle sound of loose grains. Offers and counteroffers were made in soft tones, emphasizing careful observation rather than force. Reflection lingered on this patience. The slow, repeated acts of appraisal, weighing, and inspection created trust and understanding, allowing trade to function smoothly and relationships to deepen over time. Every gesture, every pause, was a small act of diplomacy, reinforcing social cohesion and mutual dependence. Goods arrived not only by foot and river, but also through overland paths stretching far across plains and low hills. Camel caravans traced well-worn tracks, their padded feet stirring up clouds of fine dust that hung in the warm air. The smell of animal sweat, combined with the scent of dried fodder and leather saddles, added layers to the sensory environment. Traders carried clay jars, textiles, and small metal implements, each item a product of distant labor, observation, and skill. Reflection dwelt on the slow interweaving of communities across space. How patience, careful handling, and respect for materials and people sustained a network that reached far beyond the river's edge. As the sun climbed, shadows shifted, revealing the textures of mud-brick walls, woven mats, and water-stained alleys. Stalls were repositioned to catch the light, jars turned to glint in the sun, and small bundles of cloth were fluffed and straightened. The tactile engagement of fingers with every object was constant, smoothing, lifting, inspecting, and arranging. Even the clatter of goods being moved from boat to market, or the faint scrape of cartwheels on hard-packed mud, contributed to a continuous sensory rhythm. Reflection emphasized the meditative quality of this repetitive, attentive labor. Here, in the deliberate organization of goods and movement of people, civilization was quietly maintained. The river itself provided a calm, steady counterpoint. Boats bobbed gently, the lapping of water against hulls punctuating the low murmur of voices. Fishermen brought in early catches, their nets glistening with droplets that caught sunlight in tiny prisms. Water-slicked clay vessels were laid carefully on mats to dry in the sun, hands brushing away sediment before displaying them for sale. The continuous presence of the river, its rhythms mirrored in the daily work of transport, preparation, and trade, underscored the interdependence of environment and human endeavor. Evenings were marked by a gradual slowing. Boats were guided back to docks, animals were led to pens, and merchants began packing unsold goods. The smell of cooked grains and roasted seeds rose from homes lining the market paths, mingling with the fatting scent of river water and mud. Children, weary but attentive, carried final messages or small items, their movements slower, more deliberate. Reflection emphasized the rhythm of closure, how repeated cycles of preparation, exchange, and return reinforced continuity, patience, and understanding of temporal patterns. Night fell gently over the city. Lamps flickered in narrow streets, casting long, wavering shadows over packed earth and mud-brick walls. The soundscape quieted, only the distant lapping of water, the low murmur of merchants finishing accounts, and the soft shuffle of feet disturbed the stillness. Reflection lingered on the accumulated knowledge and skill embedded in a day's labor. Careful handling, patient observation, and the rhythm of trade not only sustained material life, but also cultivated trust, social cohesion, and cultural continuity. Across the vast plains and along winding rivers, the market was more than a place of exchange. It was a living classroom, a space of slow learning and deliberate attention. Every interaction, examining a pot, measuring grains, weighing beads, or noticing the glint of sunlight on metal, was a lesson in patience, sensory awareness, and the careful coordination that allowed civilization to endure. Reflection emphasized the subtle power of these ordinary acts. Repeated, attentive, and interdependent, they were the quiet heartbeat of the Indus Valley, sustaining communities, networks, and culture across space and time. As the day drew to a close, traders guided boats and caravans away from the market, footprints and wheel marks fading slowly into dust. Children returned to homes, observing the evening glow across walls and river, absorbing the lessons of the day unconsciously. Women and men paused to rest, hands still bearing the traces of clay, grains, and textiles, feeling the continuity of labor and life beneath skin and muscles. The river reflected the fading light, whispering gently of tomorrow's work and the enduring rhythm of trade, connection, and civilization. Here, in the quiet, measured exchange of goods and the attentive observation of daily practice, the Indus Valley sustained not only survival but also cultural cohesion, skill, and the slow, deliberate transmission of knowledge that would ripple across generations. The market, in all its textures, smells, and rhythms, was both ordinary and extraordinary, a living testament to the patient, repeated acts that carried life and culture forward along the river's endless flow. The morning light filtered gently through the open doorways of workshops scattered along the streets of the Indus Valley city, illuminating the soft, dusty air where craftsmen and artisans began their day. The scent of wet clay, resin, and heated metal mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of mud-brick walls, grounding the senses in the tactile reality of creation. Hands calloused from repeated labor moved deliberately, shaping, molding, and smoothing materials with a rhythm learned through years of observation and practice. Each touch, each subtle adjustment, was a dialogue between human intention and material response, a slow, intimate conversation that required patience, attention, and care. Potters bent over low wheels, their palms pressing gently on spinning clay. Fingers traced grooves, coaxing walls of vessels into precise curves, feeling the subtle vibrations through their skin as the wheel turned. Every gesture was slow, measured, deliberate, yet flowing with an almost meditative grace. The soft scraping of clay against clay, the faint splatter of slip from moist hands, and the subtle scent of water mingled with earth created a quiet, immersive soundscape. Reflection lingered on the patient repetition required to master such skill. Each form, though seemingly ordinary, was a culmination of observation, adjustment, and attention to the slow dialogue between hand, clay, and wheel. Nearby, beadmakers polished semi-precious stones against smooth slabs, each rotation revealing color, sheen, and subtle imperfection. Tiny fragments of stone skittered across wooden tables, glinting faintly in the morning sun, while the quiet tapping of tools punctuated the soft murmur of conversation. The aroma of rubbed stone and worn leather filled the air, a tactile reminder of material transformation through repeated, careful effort. Reflection dwelled on how this practice was more than the production of objects. It was a slow cultivation of discipline, patience, and aesthetic sensibility, skills transmitted quietly from one generation to the next. Metallurgists worked over small furnaces, the faint orange glow of molten metal reflecting on their faces. They leaned close, adjusting airflow with gentle breaths, listening to the hiss of molten copper and tin as it merged into alloy. The heat pressed against skin and clothing, while the smell of smoldering fuel mixed with the earthy scent of the workshop. Hands guided small molds, pouring metal with deliberate care, feeling the subtle resistance as it filled each cavity. Reflection lingered on how such innovation required not only physical skill, but also observation, memory, and an intimate knowledge of material properties. An ongoing, patient experiment repeated countless times, generating both utility and beauty. Weavers sat beneath the shade of woven mats, fingers threading delicate yarn across looms. Each motion was slow, rhythmic, deliberate, pushing, pulling, knotting, and adjusting threads with tactile precision. The soft sound of fibers rubbing together created a steady undertone to the day's labor, punctuated by faint creaks of wooden frames. The smell of spun cotton, dyed threads, and sun-warmed textile blended into the workshop air. Reflection dwelled on how such careful attention produced more than cloth. It cultivated focus, an understanding of structure and pattern, and a subtle harmony between human hand and material that echoed across homes, markets, and generations. In each workshop, the interplay of observation, repetition, and experimentation formed a quiet, enduring rhythm. Tools, chisels, hammers, needles, and brushes were extensions of the mind, the hand, and the eye, guided by centuries of accumulated experience. Craftsmen noticed subtle variations in materials, the slight moisture in clay, the grain of wood, the hardness of stone, the temper of metal. Each nuance required attention, adaptation, and slow, repeated practice. Reflection emphasized how mastery was not achieved instantly, but through patient observation, continual adjustment, and the willingness to learn from both success and failure. The ambient sounds of labor intertwined with the city's broader rhythms, children laughing in narrow lanes, the distant lap of river water against boats, the clatter of carts bringing in raw materials. The sensory environment, scent, texture, sound, was inseparable from the work itself. Reflection lingered on the way these daily practices tied individuals to their surroundings, imbuing the city with coherence, identity, and resilience. Craftsmanship was not solitary but communal. The repetition of skills across hands and workshops wove together a subtle cultural continuity. Even as materials were shaped into objects, innovation quietly unfolded. Potters experimented with new forms and glazes, beadmakers explored novel patterns, metallurgists tested new alloys, and weavers adjusted patterns to catch light differently. Observation of nature, the flow of water, the curve of leaves, the shifting sunlight, offered subtle inspiration. Reflection emphasized how innovation was not sudden but cumulative, a slow accumulation of attentive acts, each informed by previous practice and careful observation, ensuring that knowledge and skill endured and evolved. Children and apprentices moved quietly among adults, watching, touching cautiously, mimicking motions, and listening to soft, measured guidance. They absorbed the rhythm of work, the flow of materials, and the subtle cues of mastery. Their hands, guided gently by elders, learned to feel variations in texture, weight, and resistance. Reflection dwelled on the way repetition, patient guidance, and observation nurtured both technical skill and cultural continuity, transmitting knowledge in ways beyond words, through touch, rhythm, and attention to detail. As the sun began to shift, light angled through windows and open doorways, glinting on wet clay, polished stones, and glowing metal. Shadows lengthened across floors, highlighting the textures of woven mats, splattered ash, and tools worn smooth from repeated use. Reflection lingered on how attention to these small, sensory details, shape, texture, sound, and smell, was inseparable from the life of the city. Craftsmanship was a quiet meditation, a repeated act of care, observation, and dedication that sustained both material culture and social cohesion. Evening descended slowly and workshops began to empty. Tools were cleaned, floors brushed, and remaining clay or beads stored carefully for the next day. The faint scent of cooling metal, drying clay, and sun-warmed textiles lingered in the air. Reflection emphasized how the daily repetition of careful work, observation, and attention not only created tangible objects, but also embedded knowledge, discipline, and identity into the fabric of the city. Each day's labor, though quiet and measured, contributed to the endurance of civilization, ensuring that culture, skill, and creativity would persist across generations. Night settled over the Indus Valley, bringing soft stars into the sky, the river reflecting their glow in gentle ripples. The workshops were still, yet the memory of movement, touch, and sound remained, etched into walls, hands, and minds. Reflection lingered on the subtle, almost imperceptible ways in which craftsmanship and innovation shaped the city, through observation, repetition, patient practice, and communal attention. These acts, quiet and deliberate, were the heartbeat of the civilization, sustaining life, culture, and ingenuity over centuries along the river's timeless flow. The morning sun rose gently over the sprawling Indus Valley settlement, illuminating the straight, carefully laid streets that divided neighborhoods into orderly blocks. Mud brick houses rose on either side, their walls warm from the sun, their surfaces rough under the touch, telling the story of countless hands that molded them with care. The faint scent of baked clay mingled with the earthy aroma of the river nearby, and the soft murmur of the wind through narrow lanes carried hints of grain, incense, and water. Children ran lightly along the packed mud streets, feet brushing against the edges of drainage channels that curved rhythmically beside each lane, the water within whispering softly as it flowed. Residents moved deliberately through the city, carrying baskets of vegetables, clay vessels, or freshly spun textiles. Each step was attuned to the rhythm of daily life, mindful of uneven ground, shallow drains, and the gentle slopes that guided rainwater toward larger channels. Reflection lingered on the slow, deliberate care that had gone into laying these streets. How observation of seasonal floods, wind patterns, and human movement shaped every bend and intersection, ensuring that the city endured the demands of both nature and community. The drainage channels, lined with baked bricks, glinted faintly in the sunlight as water trickled through them. Women paused at wells along the streets, lowering clay pots slowly, feeling the cool water lap against their hands before drawing it upward with patient, repeated motion. Children watched, learning not only the technique but the rhythm and balance that ensured both safety and efficiency. Reflection emphasized how even the simplest daily acts reinforced a shared understanding of urban life, blending utility, observation, and communal learning. Merchants began to arrange their goods along the streets, choosing spots that caught the early sun without interfering with foot traffic. The scent of spices, beads, and woven cloth mingled with the faint smoke of hearth fires. The clatter of wooden carts over packed mud echoed softly through the avenues, while the occasional ring of pottery or drop of water into a drainage channel punctuated the ambient soundscape. Reflection dwelled on how the city's layout facilitated commerce and communication, creating a flow that connected households, workshops, and marketplaces in a quiet, invisible rhythm of life. Public spaces, though modest, reflected careful planning. Small plazas appeared at intersections, open areas where neighbors gathered for announcements, shared labor, or ritual observances. The sun warmed the surfaces, the scent of baked clay, dust, and river water blending into a tangible sense of place. Reflection lingered on how these shared spaces promoted cohesion and mutual observation, providing venues for both social learning and civic responsibility, strengthening the sense of collective identity through everyday repetition and presence. The city planner's foresight extended to storage and sanitation. Granaries lined with baked bricks stood near central lanes, their heavy doors creaking softly as workers brought in barley, wheat, and rice. Waste channels, aligned carefully with the streets, carried water and debris away without disrupting homes or markets. Reflection emphasized how attention to detail, careful repetition, and patient observation of environmental patterns were embedded into the city's very foundations, illustrating the subtle intelligence of human design responding to natural rhythms. The straight streets intersected at right angles, creating a grid that allowed air, light, and movement to circulate freely. Narrow side lanes, intentionally winding and shaded, offered shelter from the midday sun and served as play areas for children or quiet passageways for elders. The soft patter of small feet on packed mud echoed through these lanes, mingling with the hum of conversation, the tapping of tools, and the distant splash of river water. Reflection lingered on how these patterns of design balanced function and comfort, ensuring the city's vitality while fostering a sense of calm, rhythm, and observation among its inhabitants. At the edges of the city, craftsmen carried materials from the river or surrounding fields into workshops. The tactile sensation of heavy clay, smooth stones, and woven fibers under their hands mirrored the ordered streets along which they walked, reinforcing a sense of connection between labor and infrastructure. Reflection emphasized how every element of urban life, from drainage to streets, from public spaces to workshops, was interconnected, relying on careful observation, repetition, and coordinated effort to sustain a harmonious and resilient community. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shifted across lanes and drains, highlighting textures. The rough surface of mud brick walls, the uneven edges of drainage channels, the glint of water in small rivulets. Reflection lingered on how attention to these subtleties shaped both daily experience and long-term survival, teaching citizens to move thoughtfully, interact mindfully, and appreciate the quiet intelligence embedded in their surroundings. Evening brought a soft hush over the city. Children returned home, carts were cleaned and stored, and the last few merchants gathered their goods. The river's reflection shifted with fading light, and the scent of cooling brick, river water, and earth blended into a calming tapestry. Reflection lingered on the enduring lesson of urban planning, that through patient observation, deliberate repetition, and subtle attention to environment, communities could create spaces that supported life, culture, and the rhythm of daily labor across generations. By nightfall, the streets rested under a star-filled sky, the gentle flow of the Indus visible at the city's edge, whispering softly against the levees and channels. Reflection dwelled on how the combination of design, observation, and communal attention created a city capable of both functionality and beauty. Every street, channel, and block was a testament to human ingenuity expressed slowly and deliberately, a living pattern that taught patience, coordination, and quiet continuity to those who walked its paths, a rhythm as enduring as the river itself. Morning light filters softly across the city, brushing against the small shrines that punctuate the streets and open courtyards of the Indus Valley settlements. Each shrine, modest yet deliberate, is constructed of sun-baked mud brick or carefully carved stone, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands that have touched them in reverence. Smoke curls gently from incense burned on tiny altars, mingling with the faint, earthy scent of clay, water, and river mud. Birds pause on nearby rooftops, their soft calls echoing through narrow lanes, while the distant ripple of the Indus adds a gentle rhythm to the quiet reverence of the morning. Villagers approach these sacred spaces with careful, measured steps, pausing to bow or lay offerings of grain, water, or clay figurines. Children watch attentively, learning the gestures and subtle movements that mark devotion. The tactile sensation of cool stone under fingers, the rough edges of clay vessels, and the warmth of the fire from incense create a sensory tapestry that connects the physical act of worship to the rhythm of daily life. Reflection lingers on how these repeated, deliberate acts of devotion create continuity, connecting individuals to their community, the natural world, and a sense of something greater than themselves. Within the open courtyards, families gather quietly to perform seasonal rituals. Women arrange small trays of offerings with deliberate care, while men pour water into channels around the altar, the sound of flowing liquid harmonizing with soft chants and murmurs. Children imitate these actions, tracing patterns in the dust with small fingers or gently handling tiny clay figurines, absorbing not only the motions but the atmosphere of calm focus. Reflection meditates on how ritual, repetition, and observation fostered cohesion, instilled patience, and reinforced the values of respect and mindfulness across generations. In the larger temple spaces, shaded by overhanging beams and thatched roofs, the scent of herbs and resins from offerings drifts through the air. Artisans carve delicate patterns into stone and clay, their hands moving with the quiet rhythm of years of practice. The sound of chisels scraping, combined with the muted hum of prayer or chant, creates a layered sensory environment. Reflection lingers on how devotion, artistry, and practical labor intertwined, showing that sacred spaces were not just spiritual centers, but places where culture, skill, and community interwove seamlessly into daily life. At certain times of day, the sun aligns with temple doorways or altars, casting long shadows and illuminating sacred symbols painted or etched onto walls. Villagers pause to notice the interplay of light and shadow, understanding that the rhythm of day and season guides ritual timing and agricultural planning alike. The tactile warmth of clay, the shifting coolness of stone, and the soft brush of breeze through hanging textiles all reinforce a subtle connection to both the natural and spiritual worlds. Reflection emphasizes how careful observation of environment, celestial patterns, and physical gestures cultivated a deep sense of continuity, trust, and interconnection among the people. Even the smallest shrines, tucked in corners of streets or at the edge of gardens, carry layers of meaning. The faint scent of incense lingers in the air long after offerings are made, blending with the smell of baked mud and river silt. Villagers notice the details, the curve of a clay vessel, the arrangement of pebbles around an altar, or the flow of water past a tiny channel built to carry away remnants of ritual. Reflection meditates on how repeated attention to these small acts reinforces a sense of order, purpose, and mindfulness, teaching that spirituality and daily life exist not as separate domains but as interwoven threads. The city's rhythm shifts gently with the progression of time. Morning rituals give way to midday gatherings, the sound of flowing water, soft chants, and movement of hands providing a calming cadence to the day. Reflection dwells on the subtle patience required, how repetition, observation, and quiet engagement with sacred acts anchor the community, fostering harmony and continuity even amid the bustle of trade, labor, and domestic chores. At evening, incense smoke rises into the cooling air, carrying the scent of fragrant herbs across streets and lanes. Candles flicker against mud-brick walls, casting dancing shadows and illuminating the textured surfaces of sacred objects. The gentle lap of river water and the muted calls of animals provide a quiet counterpoint to the human activity. Reflection emphasizes the enduring power of repeated ritual, the way it unites past and present, individual and community, mundane and sacred, shaping a subtle, shared rhythm that sustains culture and memory across time. As night falls, the stars appear above the city, mirrored faintly in the reflective water of temple tanks or river channels. Villagers leave their sacred spaces with calm, deliberate steps, their hands still carrying the warmth of clay, water, and ritual fire. Reflection lingers on how these cycles of practice and observation cultivate not only faith, but resilience, attentiveness, and a profound awareness of the patterns that govern both human and natural worlds. Through centuries, the shrines, altars, and temple spaces bear witness to daily life, celebrations, and quiet contemplation alike. Their persistence reflects the careful cultivation of culture through repeated, attentive acts. Reflection meditates on how sacred spaces served as both anchor and compass, teaching rhythm, patience, and connection, ensuring that even amidst environmental challenges and societal changes, the community retained its cohesion, values, and sense of wonder. By the night's end, the city rests under a canopy of stars, the soft scent of incense and wet clay lingering in the air. The water in canals and temple tanks glimmers faintly in the moonlight, echoing the silent flow of the Indus itself. Reflection emphasizes the profound, quiet lesson of sacred spaces, that through observation, repetition, and attunement to both human and natural rhythms, culture, community, and faith endure, flowing gently like the river that nourishes life around it. Twilight descends upon the Indus Valley, softening the edges of streets, fields, and riverbanks. Farmers pause in their work, letting the last rays of sunlight fall upon terraces heavy with ripening crops. Children run lightly along packed mud lanes, their laughter mingling with the distant cries of birds returning to roost. Above, the sky slowly deepens, a gradient of lavender and indigo as the first stars begin to twinkle faintly. Reflection lingers on the gentle shift from day to night, and how the observation of these rhythms, light, shadow, temperature, and wind, shapes the lives of those who dwell along the river. Elders and skilled farmers gaze along levees and canal banks, noting the subtle rise of water, the pattern of silt deposition, and the tilt of reeds along the river's edge. Each bend of the Indus carries information: soil fertility, moisture levels, and the timing of seasonal floods. Hands trace mud and clay, feeling the texture and temperature, sensing how water has flowed through these channels. Reflection meditates on the intimate knowledge that emerges from repeated, careful observation, how the land itself communicates, teaching patience, timing, and adaptability to those willing to listen. At night, the sky unfolds in quiet grandeur. Farmers, builders, and traders turn their attention upwards, tracing familiar constellations and noting the shifting position of the moon. The stars, fixed yet subtly moving over the weeks and months, guide decisions about planting, harvesting, and travel. The tactile experience of pointing fingers along the sky, of sketching crude maps in the dirt, connects the observer to the cosmos in a direct, embodied way. Reflection emphasizes how these slow, deliberate acts of watching and recording celestial patterns cultivate both practical knowledge and a sense of wonder, linking human life to the larger rhythms of nature. Traders and river pilots observe not only the sky, but the subtle cues in the environment: the direction of seasonal winds, the shape of clouds, the flight patterns of birds. These signs, repeated and carefully noted over years, indicate when to set sail or delay departure, when floodwaters might threaten fields, and when the soil is ready for planting. The soft rustle of reeds, the gurgle of water along canal edges, and the faint smell of wet mud provide a continuous sensory rhythm that informs decisions. Reflection dwells on the harmony between attention, memory, and action, and how human life becomes a dialogue with nature itself through careful observation and repetition. In domestic spaces, knowledge of celestial and environmental patterns also guides everyday routines. Families note the timing of moon phases to organize festivals, mark rites of passage, or schedule work according to light and tide. Children watch elders with quiet concentration, their small hands mimicking gestures traced on the ground or in sand, learning to link observation with timing, consequence, and preparation. Reflection meditates on the slow cultivation of wisdom through observation, how the rhythm of daily life mirrors the cycles of water, wind, and stars, embedding understanding into the fabric of community. At dawn, just before the sun rises, the Indus Valley comes alive with the same gentle awareness. Mist rises from the river, carrying the scent of wet clay and ripening crops. Farmers walk levees, tracing lines of irrigation with careful eyes, noting the depth and spread of water. The stars still linger faintly, their positions providing a subtle guide to orientation and timing. Reflection lingers on the continuous interplay between celestial cues and earthly rhythms, showing how attentive observation allows the community to anticipate, adapt, and flourish. Even in the quieter corners of the city, knowledge of nature shapes practice. Artisans consider humidity and temperature when drying clay, beadmakers observe light for polishing stones, and fishermen note river currents and winds to plan nets and trips. The gentle rhythm of repeated acts, coupled with a deep awareness of natural cycles, reinforces both skill and foresight. Reflection emphasizes how patience, observation, and bodily engagement with the environment create a culture attuned to subtle patterns that govern survival and prosperity. Seasonal changes deepen this connection. Monsoon clouds gather and disperse, altering river levels and soil moisture. Farmers, scribes, and merchants alike observe wind, rainfall, and animal behavior. The rustle of leaves, the scent of damp earth, the occasional distant rumble of thunder, all provide sensory cues that inform action and planning. Reflection meditates on how the repetition of attentive observation across days, months, and years instills a shared knowledge, passed quietly from generation to generation, embedding foresight, adaptability, and communal resilience. As night falls, stars fill the sky more completely. The Milky Way stretches faintly across the horizon, and constellations rise and set with predictable rhythm. Observers note their positions in relation to rivers, homes, and fields, understanding that this celestial clock aligns with agricultural cycles, navigation, and ritual timing. The faint hum of insects and the soft splash of water under the riverbank provide a hypnotic backdrop to this meditation. Reflection emphasizes how humans, by patiently observing and internalizing these patterns, transform understanding into action, aligning life with the vast and measured rhythms of the cosmos. Through decades and generations, the continuous observation of nature and celestial patterns becomes a shared cultural practice. It governs labor, ritual, travel, and survival, quietly shaping decisions and rhythms of the Indus Valley communities. Reflection meditates on the subtle power of attentive awareness, how the slow, repeated act of watching, listening, and sensing ensures both practical success and a profound connection to the environment, linking human life to cycles far greater than the individual. By the end of night, as the river flows silently beneath the starlit sky, the community rests with knowledge quietly carried in their minds and bodies. The rhythm of water, wind, and celestial movement is mirrored in the rhythm of work, play, and ritual. Reflection dwells on the enduring lesson of attentive observation, that culture, resilience, and wisdom grow slowly through repeated engagement with the natural world, embedding in daily life a sense of continuity, foresight, and wonder that sustains a civilization across time. Morning light filters softly through the haze over the Indus Valley, touching the flat rooftops and packed mud streets of emerging cities. Farmers pause in their work, glancing towards central courtyards where elders gather to deliberate, their hands resting on sun-warmed bricks, their eyes scanning water channels and granaries with careful attention. Children play nearby, their laughter mingling with the faint sounds of water dripping from levees and the rustle of reeds along canals. The sensory world is rich. The smell of drying mud, the warmth of the sun on skin, the faint tang of livestock nearby, and the quiet hum of human activity weaving through every street. Reflection lingers on how life in these settlements depends not only on the river and soil, but on careful observation, deliberate coordination, and the slow rhythm of shared responsibility. In central courtyards, elders, craftsmen, and emerging leaders convene to discuss water distribution, trade logistics, and communal construction. Their voices rise and fall in measured cadence, gestures deliberate and restrained. A leader points to a section of levee needing repair, tracing a line with a finger across the sun-baked mud while others nod, each small motion carrying weight. Scribes copy decisions into early records, stylus scratching faintly against wet clay tablets. Reflection meditates on how the slow, repetitive processes of deliberation, documentation, and communal consensus cultivate social cohesion, embedding governance not in coercion, but in observation, trust, and patient attention. Observers note the subtle interplay of hierarchy and collaboration. Craftsmen offer insight into the feasibility of repairs. Farmers report river levels and soil conditions. Traders outline schedules for distant exchange. Each voice is considered, each observation measured, and decisions unfold slowly, echoing the natural rhythms of the environment. Reflection emphasizes how governance in these communities mirrors the broader patterns of life: patient, attentive, repetitive, and carefully aligned with both human and environmental needs. Daily life in the city continues alongside these gatherings. Children fetch water from public wells while elders monitor canal flow, women grind grain and tend fires, and artisans shape clay and beads for trade. Every movement is both individual and interdependent, a rhythm established through repeated action and subtle observation of neighbors. The faint sounds of scraping tools, water gurgling through channels, and the soft footfalls of passers-by form a continuous, gentle cadence that reinforces the city's underlying structure. Reflection meditates on how social organization emerges naturally from these repeated, attentive actions, blending human effort with environmental understanding. Water management provides a clear example of governance in practice. Decisions about the opening and closing of sluices, the timing of irrigation, and the maintenance of levees require coordination among multiple households. Hands trace canal edges, feeling for erosion or silt buildup. Small teams work together, moving deliberately with mud-slicked hands and bundled tools, communicating through glances and gestures honed over years. Reflection dwells on how such coordinated labor instills patience, observation, and an embodied understanding of communal responsibility, an education in governance passed down through practical engagement rather than formal instruction. Trade also reflects the slow cultivation of social order. Caravans arrive from neighboring settlements carrying grains, pottery, and beads. Merchants negotiate with quiet attention to fairness and reciprocity, watching the gestures, tone, and timing of each transaction. The faint smell of baked clay, sun-warmed textiles, and river air permeates the marketplace. Reflection meditates on how these repeated exchanges teach negotiation, foster trust, and sustain a network of relationships that underpins both economic stability and social cohesion. Public spaces, courtyards, granaries, and communal baths become arenas for governance and civic coordination. Scribes record contributions, artisans repair worn structures, and workers ensure clean water flows through channels. Each task, performed repeatedly and carefully observed by others, reinforces communal norms and builds trust. Reflection lingers on the subtle rhythm of these practices. How governance is enacted in quiet observation, small gestures, and the repetitive, patient execution of civic responsibility, creating a structure that supports both survival and flourishing. Ceremonial occasions also intertwine with governance. Seasonal festivals, communal offerings, and ritual observances provide structured opportunities for leaders to convey guidance, announce decisions, and reinforce communal bonds. Candles flicker against mud walls, incense drifts along lanes, and the soft chant of prayers merges with the clatter of preparation. Reflection emphasizes how ceremonial repetition reinforces social order, embedding norms and authority into the collective consciousness in ways that are as subtle as they are enduring. Even in moments of dispute or challenge, governance emerges as a gentle, deliberate process. Conflicts over water, land, or trade are discussed publicly, often in the shade of trees or along the riverbank. Hands trace boundaries in the dirt, voices rise and fall in measured tones, and solutions are reached through observation, reasoning, and patience. Reflection meditates on how these repeated, careful negotiations cultivate understanding, fairness, and shared responsibility, foundations of social cohesion that extend across neighborhoods and generations. As the sun sets, shadows lengthen along packed streets and canal edges. Workers finish repairs, traders tally inventories, and children run home with small bundles of water or firewood. The quiet rhythm of evening, soft chatter, the distant lap of river water, the scent of cooking fires permeates the city. Reflection lingers on the enduring lesson that governance is not a single act of power, but a slow, attentive, and repeated engagement with community life, environment, and shared resources, embedding order into daily rhythms and human relationships. Night deepens, and the Indus Valley rests under a canopy of stars. Leaders and elders return to homes, nodding moonlight on canals, river reflections, and the layout of streets from rooftops. Every gesture, observation, and decision of the day contributes to a living, breathing structure of social organization, quietly maintained and continuously refined. Reflection meditates on the continuity of knowledge and practice. How repeated attention to both human and environmental patterns allows a civilization to endure, adapt, and thrive, building structures of care, coordination, and foresight that ripple across generations. In this way, the Indus Valley achieves a subtle, profound form of governance, not imposed by force, but cultivated through patience, observation, repetition, and thoughtful coordination. The rhythm of daily life, work, trade, ritual, and attention to nature, forms a living curriculum in civic responsibility, teaching each generation the delicate balance between individual needs, communal welfare, and the guiding patterns of river, land, and sky. Reflection emphasizes that this slow, immersive cultivation of order underpins the resilience and sophistication of the civilization, allowing it to flourish quietly yet steadily over centuries. By nightfall, the city settles into calm. The soft murmur of water through levees, the faint creak of doors, and the distant calls of nocturnal birds form a lullaby that echoes through streets and homes. Observation, deliberation, and careful action have structured the day. Tomorrow will unfold with the same rhythms, continuing the patient, attentive cultivation of social order. Reflection lingers on the enduring lesson that true governance emerges not through abrupt power or spectacle, but through repeated, deliberate engagement with community life, embedding trust, foresight, and continuity into the heartbeat of civilization itself. The morning sun rises slowly over Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, spilling warm light across the flat rooftops, packed mud streets, and winding canals. Mist from the river lingers along the levees, softening the edges of the city and carrying the faint scent of damp earth and ripening crops. From the quiet outskirts to the bustling central streets, life awakens in a measured, deliberate rhythm. Water carriers lift clay jars, farmers move along terraces to tend crops, and artisans begin the day's labor with rhythmic care, shaping clay, polishing beads, and heating small furnaces with steady breath. The tactile sensations are everywhere. The weight of water jars in small hands, the grainy texture of sun-baked mud under bare feet, the warmth of the hearth as fires ignite, and the subtle, lingering scent of smoke mingling with earth and river air. The streets themselves pulse with quiet, continuous activity. Merchants arrange pots, beads, and textiles along market lanes, carefully observing each display, adjusting position, and noting the reactions of customers. Children dart between alleyways, laughing and calling to one another, their feet pressing into packed mud lanes, leaving brief impressions that quickly fade. Public wells serve as focal points of interaction. Women pause to exchange news while filling vessels with cool water, their movements fluid and practiced, a choreography learned through repetition over countless days. Reflection dwells on how the integration of daily life, infrastructure, and social attention creates a living pattern of interdependence, where each act of labor, care, or observation strengthens the city as a whole. Houses and public structures testify to sophisticated urban management. Each dwelling possesses private wells or bathing areas, Granaries stand at intervals, carefully constructed to store surplus grain. Public baths provide not only hygiene but social space, their water channels engineered to flow with precise calculation. The tactile and sensory world is rich. Cool water running over hands, polished mud floors, smooth beads and pottery in artisans' hands, and the occasional aroma of roasted seeds or freshly cooked lentils drifting through narrow lanes. Reflection meditates on how this integration of infrastructure and daily life represents deliberate attention, a layering of observation, labor, and foresight that sustains not only survival but culture itself. In central plazas, civic coordination and social engagement unfold simultaneously. Elders monitor water distribution, artisans repair streets and drains, and merchants coordinate trade along the riverfront. The faint scratch of stylus on clay tablets records the day's transactions and allocations, while the rhythmic splashing of water from irrigation channels punctuates the city's hum. Reflection lingers on the delicate choreography of urban life. How repeated acts of care, observation, and coordination establish patterns of resilience and continuity, embedding knowledge and civic responsibility into daily practice. Temples and shrines occupy subtle yet central positions within the urban fabric. Incense curls along morning breezes, muted chants rise in harmony with the day's labor. Citizens pause between tasks to make offerings, bow, or reflect quietly at altars, hands brushing the smooth surfaces of clay and stone. Reflection meditates on how ritual and spiritual attention interweave with practical life, reinforcing cohesion, marking time, and providing continuity across generations. Even in the rhythm of everyday work, a sense of reverence and observation persists, grounding both individuals and the collective in the enduring pulse of city life. Trade continues beyond the riverbanks. Boats drift along the Indus, their hulls gliding silently through misty channels, carrying beads, textiles, and pottery to distant settlements. Camels traverse dusty paths between urban centers, their steady gait contributing a subtle, hypnotic rhythm to the landscape. The faint aroma of spices and resin mingles with river air, while the soft slap of oars and the rustle of woven sails create an understated soundscape. Reflection emphasizes how this patient, attentive engagement with distant neighbors ensures both economic stability and cultural exchange, extending the influence of the civilization without disrupting the rhythm of everyday life. Children's play mirrors the city's careful integration of life, labor, and structure. They leap along streets, fetch water from wells, and help with chores in small, repetitive motions. Each movement is both learned and observed, a quiet instruction in cooperation, attention, and rhythm. The tactile sensations, cool water, smooth beads, packed mud underfoot, remain deeply imprinted in their experience, preparing them to participate in the city's enduring systems. Reflection lingers on how even play, repeated over time, becomes a medium for cultural transmission, teaching values, social skills, and the habits of careful observation necessary to sustain life and community. Public baths and granaries operate as both practical spaces and instruments of civic identity. Workers manage water levels with careful hands, noting small changes in flow, texture, and temperature. Granaries are inspected meticulously. Grain is sifted, weighed, and stored in clay jars, each step demanding patience and observation. Reflection meditates on how such careful attention transforms mundane labor into civic practice, reinforcing trust, responsibility, and continuity, and embedding social order into repeated acts of daily maintenance. As the day progresses, artisans' workshops echo with quiet rhythm. Potters shape clay on spinning wheels, metallurgists monitor small furnaces, and beadmakers polish each stone with gentle, repeated motions. The warm scent of earth, molten metal, and resin lingers in the air. Reflection emphasizes how technical expertise and artistic skill, honed through slow, repeated effort, cultivate both identity and pride, while ensuring that the city's culture endures through objects, infrastructure, and memory. By late afternoon, the city's energy softens. Sunlight glints across rooftops and canals, highlighting patterns in brickwork and the flowing river. Citizens return to homes and communal spaces. Children carry water, and families prepare evening meals over small hearths. The sounds of labor fade into soft conversation and the occasional splash of water as animals drink. Reflection dwells on the subtle lesson of urban life, that endurance, sophistication, and cultural flourish emerge not from grand gestures alone, but from the repeated, careful attention to work, observation, and coordination across countless acts and countless days. As dusk settles over Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the Indus reflects fading light in quiet ripples. Boats drift along levees, smoke from cooking fires mingles with the gentle scent of wet earth, and mosaics of mud-brick streets glimmer faintly under the fading sun. Reflection meditates on the enduring rhythm of urban life, how deliberate integration of infrastructure, labor, ritual, trade, and observation allows civilization to thrive in harmony with nature, embedding knowledge, responsibility, and cohesion into the very streets and waterways of the city. Night deepens. The soft hum of life, the drip of water, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional distant call of an animal forms a lullaby that carries through streets and houses. Reflection emphasizes the final, overarching lesson, that the civilization of the Indus Valley reached its peak not through conquest or spectacle, but through patient, repeated, attentive acts, careful observation, and harmonious integration of people, environment, and labor. These quiet, persistent rhythms created cities capable of sustaining life, culture, and knowledge across generations, leaving a legacy that endures beneath the river's flow, waiting to be rediscovered and remembered. Morning drifts slowly across the plains of the Indus, soft sunlight warming the packed mud streets of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Boats, freshly repaired and oiled, glide gently along the river, their wooden hulls sliding through water tinged with mist. The faint smell of wet wood and river silt mixes with the aroma of roasted grains and the subtle sweetness of river reeds. Fishermen adjust nets with careful fingers, while merchants check bundles of beads, textiles, and pottery, their eyes tracing the movement of goods and people with quiet, measured attention. Reflection dwells on the delicate balance between preparation and patience. Each task, small or large, connects these cities to a wider world that stretches far beyond the riverbanks. Overland, caravans begin their slow, steady march along dusty tracks. Camels step methodically, their padded feet stirring up soft clouds of earth. Traders sit atop laden animals, adjusting the weight of clay jars, baskets of grain, or bundles of woven cloth. Each touch is deliberate, each motion repeated countless times, learned through patient observation of both animal and terrain. The rhythmic sway of the caravans echoes a natural cadence, like the flowing river, the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze, and the gentle cry of birds. Reflection meditates on how this steady rhythm is both practical and philosophical. The Indus civilization survives and thrives through careful, repeated attention, mindful engagement, and harmonious integration of movement, labor, and observation. At river crossings, boats and camels converge with precise timing. Merchants speak softly, their words measured and deliberate, negotiating passage, payment, or the exchange of goods. The smell of incense from distant shrines mingles with the earthy scent of mud and clay, while the warmth of the sun carries the faint brine from the river's edge. Observation dominates every action, gauging the river's depth, noting wind shifts, adjusting sail or rope, watching the behavior of pack animals, and weighing the quality of goods. Reflection emphasizes how patient, deliberate observation fosters trust and cooperation, and how the repeated practice of such careful attention allows civilizations to connect, trade, and sustain relationships across vast distances. The goods themselves, beads, pottery, textiles, and grains, bear the stories of laborers, artisans, and farmers. Each bead polished by small, diligent hands, each pot shaped by repeated rotations on a wheel, Each textile woven with precision carries with it knowledge and skill. Merchants observe, handle, and transport these items with care, aware that each object is both practical and symbolic, a medium through which culture, identity, and expertise travel beyond the immediate city. Reflection meditates on how the material world embodies patience, artistry, and civic cohesion, and how trade transforms these objects into vessels of memory and influence, extending the civilization's reach without diminishing its rhythm. Along the riverbanks and trade routes, settlements large and small witness the arrival of goods and ideas. Children watch camels and boats pass with quiet fascination, learning the rhythms of commerce through observation. The tactile, sensory world, cool river water on fingers, dusty earth underfoot, the smooth polish of beads, the rough texture of clay jars, teaches them as much as the spoken word. Reflection dwells on the slow cultivation of understanding and skill through repeated observation, how knowledge travels alongside goods, and how these quiet lessons ensure continuity across generations. Seasonal patterns guide these journeys. The monsoon wind dictates timing, the river's rise and fall determines which canals and channels are navigable, and the sun's arc sets the pace for travel along overland routes. Merchants, sailors, and caravan leaders all watch, pause, and adjust to the rhythms of nature, noting small changes in current, cloud formation, or animal behavior. Reflection meditates on how careful attention to environmental cues is not merely practical but philosophical. It nurtures patience, teaches adaptation, and fosters a respectful harmony with the forces that shape life and commerce alike. By mid-afternoon, the caravan reaches a distant settlement, where boats moor alongside levees and streets hum softly with activity. Local traders inspect goods with attentive hands, comparing textures, colors, and forms. The subtle warmth of clay, the cool smoothness of beads, the delicate patterns of woven cloth, each item is assessed with a practiced eye. Exchanges are conducted slowly, deliberately. Haggling and negotiation follow repeated, familiar patterns. Reflection emphasizes the cultivation of patience and mutual respect, showing how repeated, careful engagement builds trust and social cohesion, ensuring that even across great distances, connections remain steady and reliable. The river itself serves as both artery and teacher. Sailors observe currents, note seasonal changes, and adjust sails and ropes with delicate precision. The faint lapping of water against the hull, the rhythmic slap of oars, and the soft sigh of wind through rigging form a meditative cadence, guiding both labor and reflection. Merchants pause at moments to watch water levels rise or fall, taking cues for navigation, trade, and timing. Reflection meditates on the integration of human effort with natural patterns. Understanding and patience, repetition and observation, bind the Indus civilization to the river's quiet, sustaining pulse. Evening falls, and the river's surface catches the fading light, reflecting long, golden trails across packed mud levees. Boats drift lazily, and the soft shuffle of camel feet dies into stillness. Traders unpack, secure, and prepare for the next day's rhythm, while artisans tend to workshops, polishing and shaping the next generation of goods to be carried onward. The city and the river merge in their quiet symphony, and the scent of wet earth, cooking fires, and resin from incense drifts through the air. Reflection dwells on the enduring lesson that the careful, repeated acts of attention, preparation, and observation allow civilizations not only to endure, but to extend themselves into unknown lands, leaving a legacy of ingenuity, patience, and thoughtful action. Night descends. The river glows under moonlight, and distant settlements shimmer as fires and lanterns trace human presence across the plains. The quiet murmur of water, the gentle sigh of wind through reeds, and the occasional call of a night bird form a lullaby for the living and a memory for the future. Reflection emphasizes the final, encompassing thought. The Indus Valley's endurance and influence were not born of conquest or spectacle, but through the quiet persistence of repeated, careful acts, of observation, trade, craft, and social harmony that allowed a civilization to flourish, spread its influence, and leave a legacy that continues to whisper through the river's current and beneath the soil of the plains.